When I asked if I could come to my granddaughter's birthday party, my own daughter looked at me with an expression of embarrassment and said, "Mom, you're too old to be there." The words cut through me like shards of glass in my chest. Too old, I, who had given birth to this woman who now looked at me as if I were an inconvenient stranger, apparently no longer deserved to be present at important family moments. I felt the heat of humiliation rise up my neck as my throat closed. Too old. As if my 62 years were a contagious disease that could infect a children's party. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain everyone in the room could hear it. My hands trembled as I set down my coffee cup, the bitter liquid suddenly tasting like metal in my mouth. 3 decades of memories flashed before my eyes. Midnight feedings, school plays, college tuition payments totaling $187,456. Countless hours of emotional support through her divorces, all erased by those 3 words, too old. The living room of her modern suburban home, which I had helped her decorate just 14 months ago, suddenly felt alien and hostile. The sleek gray sofa where we sat seemed to grow harder beneath me, the trendy abstract art on the walls blurring as tears threatened. I blinked them back furiously, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing how deeply she'd wounded me. My granddaughter Sophia was turning 8, a milestone I had been looking forward to celebrating. I'd already wrapped her gift a delicate silver bracelet with her birthstone, selected with such care from the jewelry store downtown where Frank and I had bought our wedding rings 38 years ago. The box sat in my purse, suddenly feeling like an unwelcome intrusion, just like me. I drove home in a fog that evening, my vision blurred not just from the tears I refused to let fall, but from a strange sense of unreality. The same route I had driven for 17 years suddenly felt foreign. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 6:43 p.m., but sat in the car for another 23 minutes, unable to find the energy to move. The house I had once shared with my husband before his death 4 years and 3 months ago loomed empty and silent. When I finally made it inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Had I always had those lines around my eyes? When had my hair become so gray? My daughter's words echoed in my mind. Too old. Too old. Too old. The sound of my keys hitting the ceramic bowl by the door echoed in the empty house. The familiar scent of the lavender diffuser in the entryway, once comforting, now seemed to mock the notion that this was a home filled with life. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, not bothering to turn on lights, until the darkness became so complete I could no longer see my way. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and stared blankly at its contents. Containers of leftovers meticulously labeled with dates, fresh vegetables arranged in clear bins, a bottle of white wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. The thought of eating made my stomach clench. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan made 347 rotations while I stared upward, counting each one. Anything to avoid confronting the pain that had lodged itself between my ribs like a physical object. At 3:17 a.m., I got up and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out old photo albums. Pictures of myself at 30, at 40, at 50. I traced the progression of my face, watching youth slip away in increments so small they were imperceptible, until suddenly, they weren't. When had I crossed the invisible line from woman to old woman? And why hadn't anyone warned me? The weight of the photo album, a heavy, leather-bound thing Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary, pressed against my thighs as I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor. The carpet fibers scratched against my bare legs, and the chill of the night air raised goosebumps on my arms. I flipped through pages with methodical precision, examining each photograph as if it contained some secret code I could decipher. Here I was at 35, holding newborn Jennifer in the hospital, my face radiant, despite 27 hours of labor. Here at 42, standing proudly beside Jennifer at her 8th grade graduation. At 47, helping her move into her college dorm room. At 53, walking her down the aisle after her father's stroke left him unable to fulfill the traditional role. Each image showed a woman present and essential, not an embarrassment to be hidden away. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a headache that pounded behind my temples. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table, the one I had chosen with such care when we renovated 12 years ago. The morning light hit the polished wood, highlighting every scratch and dent that had accumulated over the years. Just like my face, I thought bitterly. I pulled out my phone and began searching. Anti-aging treatments, how to look younger, cost of facelift. The prices made my stomach drop. $15,000 for a facelift, $3,500 for fillers, $4,200 for laser treatments. I had savings of $253,467 from Frank's life insurance and my own careful financial planning over the years. I could afford it. But something inside me hesitated, a small voice asking why I should have to pay thousands of dollars to earn the right to attend my own granddaughter's birthday party. The steam from my coffee curled upward in the sunlight, creating patterns that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Outside my kitchen window, the neighborhood was coming to life. Mrs. Patterson from next door, retrieving her newspaper in a floral robe. The Rodriguez children waiting for the school bus at the corner. A delivery truck rumbling down the street. The world continued its normal rhythm while mine had been fundamentally altered. I finished my coffee, the last sip bitter and cold, and placed the mug in the dishwasher with a precision that felt like the only thing I could control. Still, that afternoon, I found myself at the mall for the first time in months. I wandered through department stores, eyeing the clothing sections with uncertainty. Which department was appropriate for me now? Juniors, women's, the dreaded section sometimes labeled mature. I picked up a bright blue blouse, then put it back. Too young, a beige cardigan. Too old. The words of a saleswoman floated over from where she was helping a customer who couldn't have been more than 35. This is so appropriate and flattering. I'd never considered before that there were things I was no longer allowed to wear, colors that were now forbidden. I left empty-handed, the weight of invisibility pressing down on my shoulders. The mall was crowded with Tuesday afternoon shoppers, mothers with young children, teenagers just out of school, elderly couples walking arm in arm for exercise in the climate-controlled environment. I passed a group of women approximately my age, laughing together outside a restaurant. They wore colorful clothes, statement jewelry, fashionable haircuts. They looked confident, visible. I found myself staring, wondering what secret they possessed that I didn't. One of them caught my eye and smiled. I quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught studying them, and hurried toward the exit, the squeak of my sensible shoes on the polished floor seeming suddenly loud and conspicuous. 3 days passed. I didn't call my daughter. She didn't call me. I moved through my days like a ghost, going through motions, making meals I barely tasted, watching TV shows I couldn't recall later, sleeping in fragments of hours strung together with wide-awake anxiety. On the 4th day, my phone rang at 11:23 a.m. It was Sophia, my granddaughter, her voice so small and clear. "Grandma, are you coming to my party on Saturday? I want to show you my new magic tricks." My throat tightened. "I don't think I can make it, sweetheart," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Why not?" she asked, with a child's direct curiosity. "Why not indeed?" "Because your mother thinks I'm too decrepit. Because I might embarrass her with my wrinkles and gray hair." "I'm not feeling well," I said instead. Another lie. "I'll send your gift with your mom." After we hung up, I sat motionless for exactly 47 minutes, until my legs had gone numb and pins and needles shot through my feet when I finally stood. The house seemed to close in around me, the silence no longer peaceful, but oppressive. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Frank's parents, now gone for 12 and 15 years, respectively, seemed to mark another second of my life, slipping away, unused, unwanted. I moved to the window and watched as the mail carrier delivered the day's assortment of bills, catalogs, and charitable solicitations. Even junk mail senders considered me relevant enough to solicit, I thought with bitter humor. At least someone wanted my attention, even if only for my money. That same evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, fully naked for the first time in years. I forced myself to look, really look, at my body. the softness around my middle, where firmness had once been, the slight downward pull of gravity on skin that had lost its elasticity, the silver threads woven through hair that had once been chestnut brown. I traced the cesarean scar low on my abdomen, a 41-year-old reminder of the day I'd brought my daughter into the world. My hands, with their prominent veins and age spots, had held her seconds after she took her first breath. These hands had buttoned tiny clothes, wiped away tears, clapped at graduations, and now they were apparently too old, too unsightly to be seen at a child's birthday party. The bathroom light was harsh, unforgiving in its bright fluorescence. I had installed it myself 7 years ago, wanting better illumination for applying makeup. Now it seemed like an instrument of torture, highlighting every imperfection. The cold tile beneath my feet sent a chill up my legs. I turned to see my profile, noting the slight stoop that had developed in recent years, the result of osteopenia diagnosed at my last physical, 8 months ago. The doctor had prescribed calcium supplements and weight-bearing exercise. I had followed his instructions diligently, as I did most things in life. Always the good girl, the responsible one, the one who followed rules and met expectations. Until now, when apparently the expectation was that I should simply disappear. The following day, I went to my regular hair appointment with Susan, who had been cutting my hair for 14 years. As she worked, I watched her hands in the mirror. Susan was about my age, maybe a year or two younger at 60. Her fingers were nimble as she sectioned my hair, but I noticed the same prominent veins, the same slight swelling at the knuckles that mine had. "Have you ever thought about covering your gray?" she asked, catching me studying our reflections. I'd been letting my natural color grow in for the past 2 years, after decades of coloring. "My daughter thinks I'm too old," I blurted out, immediately regretting the admission. Susan's hands paused momentarily before resuming their work. "Too old for what?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "To attend my granddaughter's birthday party," I said, the words still carrying their sting. Susan's eyes met mine in the mirror. "That happened to me last year," she said quietly. "My son said I didn't fit the vibe of my grandson's gaming party." The salon around us buzzed with activity. The hum of hairdryers, the snip of scissors, the chatter of clients and stylists, the scent of shampoo and hair products filled the air, comfortingly familiar. But in that moment, Susan and I existed in a bubble of shared experience, a moment of recognition that made my chest tighten with a mixture of relief and sadness. I wasn't alone. But the fact that I wasn't alone meant this was happening to women everywhere. This gradual erasure, this being set aside as if our expiration date had passed. Something shifted inside me at that moment. A tiny crack in the shell of isolation I'd been building around myself. "What did you do?" I asked her. Susan smiled. "A small, sad thing. I went anyway. Brought a cake I made myself, with little fondant game controllers on top that I learned to make from YouTube. The kids loved it. My son was annoyed but got over it." She set down her scissors and placed her hands on my shoulders, our eyes meeting in the mirror. "Patricia, we become invisible if we allow ourselves to be. And I'm not ready to disappear yet." The weight of her hands felt like an anchor, grounding me in a reality I had been trying to escape. The simple human contact, the first I'd experienced in days, brought tears to my eyes that I couldn't blink away fast enough. One escaped, tracking down my cheek in full view of anyone who might be looking. Susan handed me a tissue without comment, a small kindness that nearly undid me completely. That night, I dreamed of Susan's words, of visibility and invisibility, of taking up space versus shrinking away. I woke at 4:16 a.m. with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. Saturday arrived, the day of Sophia's party. I stood in my closet at 9:37 a.m., surveying my options. After much deliberation, I chose a dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a friend's retirement party. Emerald green knee-length with 3/4 sleeves. Not trying to look younger than my 62 years, but not apologizing for them either. I applied my makeup with careful attention, neither hiding my age, nor emphasizing it. At 11:52 a.m., I got into my car and drove to my daughter's house, my heart racing with a mixture of determination and fear. The 17-minute drive felt like both an eternity and an instant. I rehearsed what I might say, how I might act, whether I should confront Jennifer about her words or simply pretend they had never been spoken. No strategy felt right. I pulled over 2 blocks from her house, put the car in park, and sat breathing deeply for exactly 7 minutes, timing myself with the dashboard clock. In 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. The technique my therapist had taught me 4 years ago when grief had threatened to drown me after Frank's death. When I finally put the car back in drive, my hands were steady. When I arrived at 12:14 p.m., the party was already in full swing. Children's laughter echoed from the backyard. I clutched the gift I'd brought for Sophia magic set I'd ordered online after our phone conversation, costing $78.95 plus expedited shipping, and rang the doorbell. My daughter Jennifer opened the door, her expression shifting from welcome to surprise to something more complicated when she saw me. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "I didn't know you were coming." I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, my diaphragm, my entire body. "Sophia invited me," I said simply. Before she could respond, my granddaughter appeared behind her, spotting me with a squeal of delight. "Grandma, you came." She threw her arms around my waist, her face tilted up to mine with pure joy. Over her head, I met my daughter's eyes. Something silent passed between us, a challenge issued and received. She stepped aside to let me in. The foyer of her home was decorated with balloons in purple and silver, Sophia's current favorite colors. A banner reading "Happy 8th Birthday, Sophia" stretched across the entryway to the living room. The air smelled of chocolate cake and the fruity punch that had been a staple of Jennifer's own childhood parties. The sounds of children playing and the faint beat of music drifted in from the backyard. I handed Jennifer the wrapped box containing the magic set. "Where should I put this?" I asked, my voice more steady than I felt. She took it from me with a stiff smile. "On the gift table in the dining room. We're opening presents after cake." The next 3 hours were a strange mixture of joy and tension. I helped serve cake, laughed at Sophia's attempts at magic tricks, made small talk with other parents. All the while, I felt Jennifer's eyes on me, assessing, judging. At one point, I overheard her speaking to another mother. "My mom insisted on coming," she said, her voice pitched low, but not low enough. "She doesn't really understand the whole vibe we were going for." The other woman, who couldn't have been more than 40, glanced my way with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. The familiar heat of humiliation began to rise, but this time, I refused to let it consume me. Instead, I walked directly toward them, maintaining eye contact. "Jennifer," I said calmly, "could you help me find more napkins? I think we're running low." The look of shock on her face was worth every moment of discomfort. As we stepped into the kitchen together, the sound of children's laughter muffled by the closing door, I felt a strange power in having disrupted her narrative. Jennifer busied herself with locating napkins, opening and closing drawers with more force than necessary. The granite countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting. Everything in her kitchen was new, modern, organized according to the latest lifestyle guru's recommendation. "I'm surprised you came," she finally said, her back still to me as she reached into a high cabinet. "I thought I made it clear this wasn't really your scene." The words stung, but I was prepared for them this time. "You did," I replied, keeping my voice level, "but Sophia asked me to be here, and unlike you, she seems to think I still have value to offer." Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself alone in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Jennifer came in, her arms full of paper plates and plastic cups. "You didn't have to come, Mom," she said, not looking at me as she shoved the trash into a garbage bag. "Sophia invited me," I repeated, closing the dishwasher with a firm click. "She's 8, Mom, she doesn't understand." Jennifer's voice had an edge of frustration. "Understand what, exactly?" I asked, turning to face her fully. She sighed, exasperated. "That this was a cool party for kids. We had that whole video game set up, the DJ. It wasn't the place for ... double quotes. She gestured vaguely in my direction, not finishing the sentence. "For someone like me," I finished for her. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Jennifer's face flushed, whether with anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. That's not what I meant, she said, but her eyes slid away from mine, betraying the lie. It's exactly what you meant, I replied, surprising myself with my calm. But what I don't understand is when you decided I was an embarrassment, rather than your mother. I turned and walked out of the kitchen before she could respond, feeling her eyes on my back as I went to say goodbye to Sophia and thank her for inviting me to her party. The little girl hugged me tightly, completely unaware of the tension between her mother and grandmother. "Did you like my magic tricks, Grandma?" she asked, her face earnest and hopeful. "They were the best magic tricks I've ever seen," I told her truthfully. Over her head, I saw Jennifer watching us, her expression unreadable. That night, I drove home in silence. No radio, no distractions, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional car passing by. At home, I kicked off my shoes and made a cup of tea, the ritual familiar and comforting. As I waited for the water to boil, I opened my laptop and typed a new search term, ageism. The results were eye-opening. Articles, studies, personal stories, statistics. According to one study, women begin experiencing age discrimination as early as 40, while for men, it typically starts around 45. The wage gap widens with age, with women over 50 earning up to 30% less than their male counterparts. Women in media virtually disappear after age 50, with only 8% of speaking roles going to women over 60. I read for 2 hours and 17 minutes, until my eyes burned and my tea had gone cold beside me. Something was taking shape inside me, not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a dawning recognition. This wasn't just about me and my daughter. This was a system, a pattern, a societal illness. The kettle had long since automatically shut off, the water cooling in the still air of my kitchen. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across my small front yard. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had become the soundtrack to my solitary evenings. But tonight, they didn't feel like reminders of my aloneness. Instead, they felt like the background noise to something stirring within me, something that had been dormant for too long. The following Tuesday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my friend Diane for lunch. We'd drifted apart after Frank died, my grief creating a chasm I hadn't had the energy to bridge. We met at a small cafe downtown at 1 p.m. Diane looked good. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, styled in a sleek bob that suited her heart-shaped face. She'd always been fashionable, and at 64, that hadn't changed. She wore a bright red blazer over a black top, statement earrings catching the light when she moved. "Patricia," she said, embracing me warmly. "It's been too long." Over salads and iced tea, I told her about what had happened with Jennifer and the birthday party. As I spoke, I watched Diane's expression shift from sympathy to indignation. "That's outrageous," she said when I finished. "Absolutely outrageous." The cafe buzzed around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations at neighboring tables. A young server, probably a college student, refilled our water glasses without meeting our eyes. I wondered briefly if we were invisible to her, or if she was simply efficient in her movements. Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her skin warm against mine. "I'm so sorry, Patricia, but I'm also angry for you. You know this isn't about you, right? This is about Jennifer and her issues." What happened next surprised me. Diane shared her own story about being passed over for a promotion at 58 in favor of a colleague 15 years her junior with half her experience. "They said I wasn't a good culture fit anymore," she said, making air quotes with her fingers. After 22 years at the company. Then she told me about her sisterhood. Been told by her son that she should dress more appropriately for her age after she wore a knee-length skirt to a family dinner. Story after story spilled out between us, experiences we'd never shared before, indignities we'd each silently endured. For the first time since Jennifer's words had cut me open, I felt something other than shame. I felt angry, and beneath the anger, something else was growing, resolve. The lunch stretched from our planned 1 hour to nearly 3. The dishes long cleared away, our tea glasses refilled multiple times. By the time we finally left the cafe, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt different. Not healed, not entirely, but changed in some fundamental way. Diane hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, holding on a beat longer than necessary. "Come to my group on Saturday," she said as she pulled away. 11 a.m. at the community center on Elm. "You'll like it, I promise." I agreed without asking what kind of group it was. In that moment, I would have agreed to anything that promised human connection with someone who saw me as I was, not as a problem to be managed or an embarrassment to be hidden. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a community center meeting room with 12 other women ranging in age from 55 to 78. Diane had invited me to what she called her Revolution meetings, a support group for women dealing with ageism in their personal and professional lives. Each woman introduced herself and shared a brief story. Margaret, 71, whose grandchildren's other grandmother was always invited to events while she was forgotten. Barbara, 67, whose manager had started assigning her fewer clients, claiming he was lightening her load, though she'd never requested it. Helen, 58, whose husband had left her for a 34-year-old, telling her she had let herself go. As I listened, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. These women understood without explanation, without qualification. When it was my turn to speak, the words came easily, without the shame that had colored them when I'd spoken to Diane. The community center room was nothing special: fluorescent lighting, beige walls, folding chairs arranged in a circle. Coffee percolated in the corner, the scent mingling with various perfumes and the faint mustiness of a building that had seen decades of use. But in that unremarkable space, something remarkable was happening. I was finding my voice again, and it was being received, not with judgment, but with recognition and validation. "The worst part," I said as I finished recounting my story, "is that I believed her. I believed I was too old, that I didn't belong." Margaret nodded, her silver hair catching the light. "They train us to erase ourselves," she said, "and we're so good at following instructions." That night, I started a journal. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Day 1 of visibility." I documented everything: Jennifer's words, the party, my feelings, the research I'd done, the group I'd joined. I recorded the exact phrases used, the times, the physical sensations. It wasn't just catharsis, it was evidence. Proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't being too sensitive, as my daughter might say. I wrote for 67 minutes straight, filling 7 pages with my neat, precise handwriting. When I finished, my hand ached and my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. I slept deeply that night, without dreams, waking refreshed at 6:15 a.m. The morning air was cool as I stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper from my driveway, dew dampening the hem of my robe. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses still dark, their occupants asleep or just beginning to stir. I stood for a moment, breathing in the fresh air, feeling more present in my body than I had since that awful day at Jennifer's. The newspaper, yes, I still preferred print to digital. Another marker of my age perhaps was heavy in my hand. Headlines about politics, the economy, a local school board controversy. The ordinary concerns of the world continuing while individual lives were appended in ways that would never make the news. Back inside, I made coffee and settled at the kitchen table. The journal from the night before opened beside me. I added a new entry, documenting the strange sense of peace I'd woken with, the quality of the morning light, the weight of the newspaper in my hand. Small details that anchored me in the present moment, in the reality of my continued existence despite having been declared obsolete. The following week brought another birthday party invitation, this time for my nephew's son, who was turning 10. The invitation came from my sister-in-law, Laura, who had always been kind but distant. I called her directly instead of responding to the group text. "I'd love to come," I said, "but I want to make sure I won't make anyone uncomfortable with my presence." The line went quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" Laura asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I explained what had happened with Jennifer. Laura's response was immediate and forceful. "That's ridiculous. Of course we want you there. The kids adore you. The validation was like cool water on a burn. We talked for 43 minutes. The conversation eventually shifting from the party to Laura's own experiences as she approached 60. Another crack in the wall, another hand reaching through. Laura had always been polished and put together, the type of woman who color-coordinated her holiday decorations and served Instagram-worthy meals on perfectly set tables. To hear her confess her own anxieties about aging, about becoming irrelevant, was both surprising and comforting. "I found my first gray pubic hair last month," she said with a laugh that held a hint of panic. "I nearly called my gynecologist to ask if I should be concerned." We laughed together. The absurdity of our shared condition creating a new intimacy between us. "Come early to the party," she said before we hung up. "I could use the help, and honestly, I'd like to talk more." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like anticipation for a social event rather than dread. 2 weeks and 3 days after the fateful birthday party, Jennifer called. I was in my garden, planting the tomato seedlings I'd started indoors 27 days earlier. I let the call go to voicemail, finishing what I was doing before, washing my hands and listening to her message. "Mom, can we talk? Maybe dinner this week." Her voice sounded tentative, unusual for my confident daughter. I called back and agreed to dinner at her house the following evening at 7 p.m. That night, I prepared myself as if for battle, reviewing the notes in my journal, practicing what I might say, how I might respond to various scenarios. I slept fitfully, waking 4 times throughout the night. The anticipation of confrontation sat heavy in my stomach, a physical presence that made it difficult to eat breakfast the next morning. I spent the day in careful preparation, not of my appearance, though I did select my clothing with deliberate care, choosing a blue blouse that Frank had always said brought out my eyes but of my mind. I revisited the articles I'd read on ageism, making notes of key statistics and insights. I reread the journal entries I'd made since that first day, tracking the evolution of my thoughts and feelings. By the time I left for Jennifer's house at 6:42 p.m., I felt armored with knowledge and conviction, though my hands still trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. The dinner was just the 3 of us: Jennifer, her husband Mark, and me. Sophia was at a sleepover with a friend. The conversation was stilted at first, focusing on safe topics: Mark's work, my garden, an upcoming movie release. It wasn't until after dinner, when Mark conveniently remembered some emails he needed to send, that Jennifer finally broached the subject. "Mom, about Sophia's party ... double quotes," she began, fidgeting with her napkin. "I think I may have hurt your feelings." "May have," I noted the qualification, the lack of certainty. "You did," I said simply, no elaboration, no emotional appeal, just the plain fact. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. "I didn't mean to," she said. "It's just that ... It was a very specific kind of party, very ... current, with TikTok dances and trending games. I thought you might feel out of place." The dining room was dimly lit. The overhead chandelier set to a low glow that softened the hard edges of the modern furniture. A half-empty bottle of wine sat between us, the burgundy liquid catching what little light there was. I could hear Mark typing in his home office down the hall. The soft click of keys, a counterpoint to the tense silence that followed Jennifer's words. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, twice, then fell silent. I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch. "Jennifer," I said finally, "I've been out of place many times in my life. My first day of college, when I was the only woman in my engineering class. My first board meeting at the firm, surrounded by men 20 years my senior. The day I buried your father, standing alone at the head of his casket while everyone watched. I survived all of that. I think I could have handled a children's birthday party." Jennifer had the grace to look ashamed. "I was trying to protect you," she said. But the excuse sounded hollow even to her. I could tell. "No," I countered. "You were trying to protect yourself from being embarrassed by your aging mother, from having to explain to your friends why someone old was there, from the reality that you, too, will be my age someday." I watched her face as my words landed, saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes before she looked down at her hands. The diamond on her left hand, her second engagement ring, from her second marriage, caught the light and scattered it across the table. "That's not fair," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Isn't it?" I asked. "Then tell me why, exactly, my presence at an 8-year-old's birthday party would have been a problem. Not how it would have made you feel, but what actual harm it would have caused." She had no answer for that, just as I'd suspected. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. It was difficult, painful at times, with moments of defensiveness from Jennifer and barely contained anger from me. But it was also necessary. I told her about the research I'd done, the group I'd joined, the stories I'd heard. I explained how her words had made me feel invisible, worthless, discarded. "Do you know what it's like," I asked her, "to be told you no longer belong in your own family because of something you cannot control? To be pushed aside because your face shows that you've lived?" By the end, there were tears on both sides. No neat resolution, no perfect reconciliation, but a beginning, a recognition of harm done and the possibility of repair. As I drove home that night, I felt wrung out, but also lighter, as if something calcified within me had begun to dissolve. The streets were empty at 10:47 p.m., the traffic lights changing from red to green to yellow for no one. A nearly full moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the familiar landscape. In my driveway, I sat for a moment before getting out of the car, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The house was dark, except for the porch light I'd left on, a single beacon welcoming me home. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a small glass of the brandy I kept for special occasions. It burned pleasantly as I sipped it, standing at the kitchen window and looking out at the moonlit garden where my newly planted tomato seedlings stood in neat rows. Tomorrow they would need watering. Tomorrow there would be more journal entries to write, more research to do, more connections to build with the women from the support group. Tomorrow I would continue becoming visible again. But tonight, I would simply breathe and be grateful for having spoken my truth, regardless of how it had been received. The following morning, I woke early and drove to the mall when it opened at 10 a.m. This time, I had a different mission. I went directly to a boutique I'd always admired but rarely entered, intimidated by its stylish displays and youthful clientele. The saleswoman who approached me was young enough to be my granddaughter, with vibrant blue hair and multiple earrings climbing the curve of her ear. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd rehearsed. "Yes. I'd like to update my wardrobe with pieces that express who I am, not who I'm expected to be at my age." Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I love that," she said. "Let's start with some basics, and then add statement pieces that show your personality." The boutique smelled of something expensive and subtle, not the cloying perfume that often permeated department stores, but a clean, sophisticated scent that matched the minimalist decor. Clothing hung on sparse racks, each piece given room to be seen rather than crammed together. The lighting was flattering but honest, neither too harsh nor too dim to accurately judge colors and fit. Music played softly in the background, something contemporary that I didn't recognize but didn't mind. The blue-haired saleswoman, whose name was Zoe, moved through the store with confidence, pulling pieces that I would never have selected for myself, creating combinations I wouldn't have imagined. For the next 97 minutes, I tried on clothes I would have dismissed as not for me just weeks before. Not because they were inappropriately young. I had no interest in dressing like a teenager, but because they were vibrant, distinctive. Pitching the saleswoman, whose name was Zoe, was surprisingly helpful, respecting my comfort zones while gently encouraging me to stretch them. I left with 3 new outfits costing a total of $347.82, including a pair of wide-legged red linen pants that made me feel both elegant and bold. "These look amazing on you," Zoe had said as I examined myself in the mirror. "You have the height to really pull them off. Not good for your age, or flattering for an older woman. Just a straightforward compliment that acknowledged my physical attributes without qualification." The pants were a revelation, comfortable yet stylish, practical yet distinctive. The deep red color was richer than anything I'd worn in years. a deliberate departure from the muted tones that had gradually taken over my wardrobe. When had I decided that bright colors weren't appropriate for me? I couldn't pinpoint the moment, which was disturbing in itself. As I carried my purchases to the car, the weight of the shopping bags felt symbolic somehow. I was carrying away not just new clothes but a new perspective, a willingness to be seen rather than to blend into the background. In the car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror before starting the engine. The woman who looked back at me had the same lines, the same gray hair, the same 62 years of life experience as before. But something in her eyes had changed. There was a clarity there, a determination, that had been missing before. That Saturday, I wore the red pants to my ageism support group, paired with a crisp white blouse and silver jewelry I'd had for years but rarely worn. The compliments were immediate and genuine. "You look fantastic," Margaret told me. "Those pants are everything," said Barbara with clear envy. I stood taller, took up more space, spoke more confidently as we discussed the week's topic, reclaiming joy and pleasure in a society that expects older women to fade into the background. When it was my turn to share, I talked about my conversation with Jennifer, about Zoe at the boutique, about the small acts of visibility I was practicing daily. "I'm not just fighting to be seen," I concluded. "I'm fighting to be seen on my own terms." The room felt energized by our collective determination. Women who had arrived looking tired or defeated gradually straightened their postures, raised their voices, laughed more freely as the meeting progressed. We were mirrors for each other, reflecting not the diminished versions of ourselves that society projected back at us, but the vital, complex, valuable women we knew ourselves to be. Margaret shared how she'd started correcting people who called her young lady or sweetie at stores and restaurants. "I just say, actually, I'm neither young nor sweet, but you can call me Margaret," she told us with a mischievous smile. Helen described confronting her ex-husband's comments about her appearance by sending him a wine voice for $157,842. The calculated cost of all the anti-aging products and procedures she'd used during their marriage to try to meet his expectations. We applauded her creativity, even as we recognized the pain behind the gesture. After the meeting, 5 of us went for coffee at a nearby cafe. As we sat outside on the patio, a group of young women at the next table were taking selfies, laughing and posing. "Would you like me to take a photo of all of you together?" I offered. They accepted gratefully, and after I'd taken several shots with one of their phones, one of them offered to return the favor. "We should take one too," Diane said immediately. The 5 of us positioned ourselves, arms around each other, smiling not for the camera, but from genuine pleasure in each other's company. When the young woman handed the phone back to Diane, she said something that lodged in my heart. "I hope my friends and I are still having this much fun together when we're your age." The statement could have been condescending, but her sincerity made it feel like a genuine compliment. The patio was crowded with Saturday morning coffee drinkers enjoying the mild spring weather. Sunlight filtered through the canvas awning, creating dappled patterns across our table. The ceramic mug warmed my hands as I lifted it for another sip of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of fresh pastries from the cafe's kitchen. Around us, life continued: couples on dates, families with children, solitary readers lost in books, groups of friends like us enjoying connection. We were part of the tapestry, neither central nor peripheral, simply present and engaged with the world around us. That photo became my new profile picture on Facebook, the first time I'd updated it in 2 years and 7 months. Within hours, it had received 47 likes and 23 comments, many from people I hadn't heard from in years. "Looking gorgeous, Patricia. Love seeing your smile. Where did you get those amazing pants?" The validation was nice, but what mattered more was that I had chosen to be visible, to take up digital space just as I was learning to take up physical space again. 3 days later, Jennifer called again. "Mom, I saw your picture on Facebook," she said. "You look really good." I thanked her, neither overly grateful for the compliment nor dismissive of it, just accepting it as my due. "Sophia keeps asking when you're coming over again," she continued. Would you like to have dinner with us this weekend? Sunday at 6 o'clock? I agreed, marking it on my calendar in bold letters. Dinner with family, 6 p.m. The invitation felt like an olive branch, a small step toward rebuilding what had been damaged. I spent the intervening days preparing myself emotionally, not for confrontation this time, but for the more subtle challenge of establishing a new dynamic. I wasn't interested in pretending the hurt hadn't happened, in sweeping it under the rug for the sake of false harmony. But neither did I want to dwell in resentment, to punish Jennifer indefinitely for a mistake she seemed to be trying to rectify. The balance felt precarious, like walking a tightrope between asserting my worth and allowing for reconciliation. On Sunday morning, I woke early and spent 45 minutes in the garden. The physical labor helping to ground me in my body and clear my mind for the evening ahead. The weeks that followed brought subtle but significant changes. I began attending my support group regularly, every Saturday at 11 a.m. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with, scheduling lunch dates and coffee meetings. I signed up for a photography class at the community college, something I'd always wanted to try but had put off. The class met Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., and I was by far the oldest student. But the instructor, a tattooed man in his 40s, treated me exactly the same as the others, offering the same critiques, the same encouragement, the same expectations of effort and growth. The photography class became a highlight of my week, a space where age seemed irrelevant compared to the shared struggle to capture light and composition. I invested in a decent camera, $897 plus tax for a mid-range DSLR, that the instructor helped me select, and began seeing the world differently, noticing details I had previously overlooked. My first assignment was to photograph transitions, a theme that felt almost too orthodox, given my current life situation. I submitted images of my garden at dawn, the light shifting from cool blue to warm gold as the sun rose. The instructor praised my eye for subtle gradations of color and light. "You're catching moments most people miss," he told me. And I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with defying age expectations and everything to do with developing a new skill. 54 days after Jennifer told me I was too old for my granddaughter's party, I received a text message from her at 2:17 p.m. "Mom, would you be able to pick Sophia up from school today? I have an emergency client meeting I can't reschedule." I replied immediately, "Of course, I'll be there at 3:30. It was the first time she'd asked me to help with Sophia since the incident. I arrived at the school 15 minutes early, positioning myself where Sophia would be sure to see me. When she emerged from the building and spotted me, her face broke into a wide smile that made every difficult moment of the past months worthwhile. The elementary school was bustling with end-of-day energy, children streaming out of doors, calling to friends, running to waiting parents and caregivers. Teachers supervised the organized chaos with practiced efficiency. The air smelled of playground dust and the distinctive blend of crayons, glue, and industrial cleaner that seemed universal to schools everywhere. I stood among the other waiting adults, no longer self-conscious about my age, but simply another person performing the timeless role of caregiver. When Sophia spotted me, her reaction was pure joy, unfiltered by social expectations or judgments. She ran to me, backpack bouncing, and threw her arms around me with the wholehearted enthusiasm only children can muster. "Grandma, I didn't know you were picking me up today." Her voice rose above the general din of the schoolyard, drawing a few glances from nearby parents. I hugged her back, matching her enthusiasm with my own. "Surprise," I said, feeling something tight in my chest loosen at her obvious delight in my presence. As we drove to my house, where she would stay until Jennifer could pick her up after her meeting, Sophia chattered happily about school, friends, a book she was reading. At one point, she said something that caught me off guard. "Mom said she was mean to you and made you sad." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised. "Did she?" I asked carefully. Sophia nodded solemnly. "She told me she said you were too old for my party, but that was a lie. You're not too old for anything." From the mouths of babes, I thought, warmth spreading through my chest. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. That means a lot to me. The drive to my house took 23 minutes, filled with Sophia's stories and observations. She noticed my camera on the back seat and asked about it, lighting up when I explained I was taking a photography class. "Can you teach me?" she asked. "I want to take pictures too." The simplicity of her request, the assumption that I had something valuable to teach her, felt like a healing balm. In her eyes, I wasn't defined by my age, but by what I knew, what I could share, what I could offer. It was the most natural thing in the world to her that her grandmother would be learning new skills, having new experiences, remaining engaged with life, rather than retreating from it. At my house, we baked cookies together, measuring ingredients with precise care: 2¼ cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. As the kitchen filled with the sweet smell of vanilla and chocolate, Sophia asked if she could take my picture. "For my school project," she explained. "We're doing a thing about important women in our lives." I agreed, and she used my phone to snap several photos of me rolling cookie dough, laughing at something she said, sliding the baking sheet into the oven. Later, looking at the images she'd captured, I was struck by what I saw. Not an old woman trying to look younger, or an old woman resigned to invisibility, but simply a woman, alive and engaged and present. A woman with lines earned through living, with hands that showed her years of work and love, with eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow and remained open to seeing more. The kitchen was warm from the oven, filled with the mingled scents of baking cookies and the lemon cleanser I'd used on the counters that morning. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window over the sink, catching dust motes in its golden beam. Sophia had a smudge of flour on her cheek and chocolate at the corner of her mouth. The moment felt perfect in its ordinariness. In its timelessness, generations of women had stood in kitchens like this, teaching and learning, creating sustenance and connection. I belonged here, in this moment, in this life, in this body that had carried me through 62 years of experiences both bitter and sweet. That evening, after Jennifer had picked up Sophia and the house was quiet again, I sat down with my journal and wrote about the day, about Sophia's words, about the photos she'd taken. I ended with a realization that felt important enough to underline twice. My worth is not diminished by time. It is enriched by it. I slept deeply that night, dreaming of cookies baking and children laughing and a future stretching out before me, full of possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. Morning came with a clarity that felt new yet familiar, like returning to a part of myself I had temporarily forgotten. I made coffee and took it outside to the back porch, watching the early light change the colors of my garden minute by minute. The tomato plants had grown noticeably in the 2 weeks since I'd put them in the ground, their stems thickening, their leaves expanding to catch the sunlight. Growth was happening whether I watched it or not, whether I acknowledged it or not. The same was true of my own evolution, I realized. It didn't require outside validation to be real. It simply was. With that thought came a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years, freedom from the weight of others' perceptions, from the tyranny of cultural expectations, from the prison of internalized ageism that had gradually constricted my sense of possibility. The following week, I received an email from Barbara, one of the women in my support group. Subject line: "You need to see this." The body of the email contained a link to a petition on change.org titled "End Age Discrimination in Media and Advertising." It had been started by a coalition of women over 50 who were demanding better representation in magazines, commercials, TV shows, and movies. I signed immediately, adding my name to the 12,478 others who had already done so. Then I forwarded it to everyone in my contact list with a personal note explaining why it mattered to me. By the end of the day, the petition had gained 37 new signatures from people I knew. A small victory, perhaps, but it felt significant, a ripple in what might become a wave. The petition was only the beginning. Barbara's email had included links to articles, studies, and organizations focused on combating ageism. I spent 3 hours and 42 minutes that evening following one link to another, reading testimonials, statistics, and calls to action. I learned that women over 50 controlled net wealth of $19 trillion, yet were largely ignored by marketers. I discovered that age discrimination complaints to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had increased by 47% over the past decade. I found stories of women who had fought back through lawsuits, through entrepreneurship, through activism, through art. Each story fed something growing inside me, a sense of being part of something larger than my personal experience. This wasn't just about a hurtful comment from my daughter or my exclusion from a child's party. This was about a systemic issue affecting millions of women, an issue that remained largely unaddressed because those affected had been conditioned to accept their gradual erasure as natural and inevitable. Exactly 73 days after the incident that had started it all, I hosted a dinner party at my home, the first since Frank had died. I invited my support group friends, Diane, my sister-in-law, Laura, and yes, Jennifer and her family. As I prepared the house, cleaning and arranging flowers and vases, I thought about how much had changed in less than 3 months. The woman who had driven home in tears, who had searched for ways to erase her age, who had considered herself unworthy of taking up space, felt like a stranger now. Or perhaps not a stranger, but a past version of myself I had finally outgrown. I spent the day cooking a skill I'd always enjoyed but had let slide in the years of cooking for one. The menu was ambitious, a roasted vegetable tart that required 17 ingredients and 2 hours of preparation. A complex salad with homemade vinaigrette, freshly baked bread that filled the house with its yeasty aroma as it rose and baked. The activity was meditative, each step requiring focus and presence. Chopping vegetables, kneading dough, measuring spices, these familiar actions grounded me in my body, in the moment, in the pleasure of creating something to share with others. The house, too, came alive as I moved through it with purpose, opening windows to let in fresh air, arranging chairs for conversation, placing candles strategically for evening light. This space that had sometimes felt like a mausoleum in the years since Frank's death was becoming a home again, a place of connection rather than isolation. The dinner was scheduled for 7 p.m. At 6:58 p.m., the doorbell rang, and the evening began. There were moments of awkwardness, particularly when Jennifer first arrived and surveyed the gathering with surprise. I hadn't told her who else would be there. But there were more moments of connection, of laughter, of shared stories and new friendships forming. I watched Sophia interact with Margaret, listening with rapt attention as the 71-year-old described growing up in the 1960s. I saw Jennifer gradually relax as she realized no one was there to judge or accuse her, only to build bridges. At 10:43 p.m., as the last guests were leaving, Diane hugged me tightly and whispered, "You've started something beautiful here." I knew she wasn't just talking about the dinner. The house seemed to hold the evening's energy, even after everyone had gone, the lingering sense of food and wine, the subtle rearrangement of furniture to accommodate conversation, the empty plates and glasses waiting to be washed. I moved through the rooms slowly, not rushing to clean up but savoring the evidence of community, of life shared. In the living room, I found Sophia's hairband on the floor beside the sofa, where she had sat cross-legged, absorbed in Margaret's stories. In the dining room, a lipstick print on a wine glass marked Barbara's presence. These small traces of others felt precious after so many solitary evenings. I left most of the cleanup for morning, taking only the perishable food to the kitchen before turning out lights and heading to bed. As I laid my head on the pillow at 11:37 p.m., I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, anticipation for tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. The next morning, I woke early and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise and thinking about beginnings. At 62, I was starting a new chapter, not an epilogue or a winding down, but a genuine new beginning. I opened my laptop and began to type, not in my journal this time, but in a new document. Too old for this, a journey of rediscovery, I titled it. The words flowed easily, my story spilling onto the page, not as a complaint or a cry for help, but as a roadmap for others who might find themselves where I had been, believing the lie that their worth diminished with each passing year. The kitchen was cool in the early morning. the sunlight gradually warming the eastern-facing windows. Steam rose from my coffee cup, dissipating in the still air. Outside, birds began their morning songs, a soundtrack to my typing. I worked steadily, pausing occasionally to sip coffee or gaze out the window, letting memories surface and find their way into words. There was something almost magical about the process, about transforming pain into purpose, confusion into clarity, isolation into connection. By giving shape to my experience, I was reclaiming it, defining it on my terms, rather than accepting the definitions imposed by others. The document grew under my fingers, not just a record of what had happened, but an exploration of what it meant, what it revealed about our culture, what it could teach about resilience and self-reclamation. I wrote for 4 hours and 12 minutes straight, stopping only when my growling stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten. As I made a simple lunch of soup and bread, I thought about what came next. The document I'd started could become many things: a blog, an article, maybe even a book someday. But whatever form it took, its purpose was clear: to shine a light on a shadow that had darkened too many lives for too long. Not just for myself, but for Diane and Barbara, and Margaret and Helen, for my daughter Jennifer, who would someday face the same prejudices if nothing changed, for my granddaughter Sophia, who deserved to grow up in a world where becoming an older woman wasn't something to fear but something to celebrate. The soup warmed me from the inside as I ate, sitting at the table where the laptop still waited, screen glowing with my morning's work. Through the window, I could see my garden, the tomato plants reaching toward the midday sun, the herbs I'd planted sending up new shoots, the rosebush that had been here when we bought the house 17 years ago, preparing to bloom once again. Growth and renewal surrounded me, reminding me that nothing in nature apologizes for aging, for changing, for evolving. Only humans had created that particular burden, and what humans had created, humans could dismantle. The thought energized me, propelling me back to the laptop once I'd finished eating, eager to continue giving shape to the ideas that were forming within me. 3 months and 12 days after being told I was too old, I submitted my first article to an online platform for women over 50. The piece, titled "The Day My Daughter Called Me Too Old," was published 1 week later. Within 24 hours, it had been shared 1,867 times, and received 432 comments. Women from across the country and some from as far away as Australia and the UK wrote to tell me their own stories, to thank me for putting words to experiences they'd struggled to articulate. Television producers, radio hosts, and podcast creators reached out for interviews. At the age of 62, I suddenly found myself with a platform, a voice, and a purpose I hadn't anticipated. The first interview request came via email at 9:47 a.m., just hours after the article went live. A producer from a morning talk show wanted me to appear via video link the following day to discuss the piece and its resonance with so many women. I read the email 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. When I called Diane to tell her, her response was immediate: "You have to do it." The thought of appearing on television, even just from my living room via a computer screen, terrified me. What would I wear? What would I say? What if I looked exactly like the stereotypical old woman I was fighting against being reduced to? Diane listened patiently to my fears, then said something that stopped them in their tracks. "Patricia, visibility is the whole point, being seen exactly as you are. That's what you've been fighting for." She was right, of course. To refuse the opportunity out of fear of being seen would be to undermine everything I now believed in. I replied to the producer at 11:23 a.m., accepting the invitation. 6 months after the birthday party incident, I stood in front of an audience of 237 women at a conference on women's issues, sharing my story and the lessons I'd learned. I wore the red pants that had become something of a signature item, paired with a blue blouse and comfortable but stylish shoes that let me stand confidently for the entire 47-minute presentation. As I spoke, I could see heads nodding, tears being wiped away, notes being taken. When I finished, the applause lasted for 83 seconds, counted each one, still in the habit of documenting everything precisely. The conference center was a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. My session was held in a medium-sized room with chairs arranged in neat rows. A podium at the front equipped with a microphone and water glass. The audience was predominantly female, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 70s. Their faces turned toward me with expressions of recognition, empathy, and determination. As I spoke, I felt a curious sensation, a kind of electric connection between us. As if my words were completing circuits, illuminating shared experiences that many had thought were unique to them. The nerves I'd felt while waiting to be introduced had dissolved the moment I began speaking, replaced by a calm certainty that what I was sharing mattered, that it needed to be heard, that it could create change, one mind at a time. After the talk, women lined up to speak with me. Some shared their stories, some asked for advice, some simply wanted to thank me. One woman, who introduced herself as Elaine, stood out. "I'm 43, she told me, and I've been dreading getting older since I turned 40. But listening to you, I realized I've been looking at it all wrong. You've given me something to look forward to instead of fear." Her words stayed with me long after the conference ended, a reminder that what I was doing mattered, not just for women my age, but for younger generations as well. The line of women waiting to speak with me stretched down the hallway outside the conference room. Event staff eventually had to ask us to move to a nearby lounge area to make way for the next session. I spoke with each person who waited, giving them my full attention, listening as much as talking. Many handed me business cards or scraps of paper with email addresses, asking to stay in touch. By the time the last person left, my voice was hoarse and my feet ached from standing, but I felt energized rather than depleted. This connection, this sharing of experience and purpose, was sustaining in a way I hadn't anticipated. It reminded me of something Frank used to say about his work as a teacher. "The days I give the most are the days I come home with the most." That evening, in my hotel room, I called Jennifer. Our relationship was still healing, still finding its new shape, but every conversation brought us closer to understanding. "How did it go?" she asked after I told her about the conference. "Really well," I said. "I think people are ready to have this conversation." There was a pause before she spoke again. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You've turned something painful into something powerful." I felt tears prick my eyes, unexpected emotion welling up. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means everything to me." The hotel room was anonymous but comfortable, neutral colors, standardized furniture, the faint hum of the air conditioning creating white noise in the background. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the distance between Jennifer and me, both physically and emotionally. 6 months ago, her words had shattered something between us. Now, different words were beginning to rebuild it, not into what it had been before, but into something new, potentially stronger for having been broken and deliberately repaired. After we hung up, I ordered room service, a salad and glass of wine that arrived 27 minutes later, and ate while looking over my notes for the panel discussion I would participate in the following day. The topic was reclaiming visibility, women over 50 in the public sphere, and I had been asked to join 3 other women, an actress, a political consultant, and a magazine editor, in exploring the challenges and opportunities of remaining visible and relevant in various fields. The next morning, as I checked out of the hotel at exactly 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my heart skip. Book proposal inquiry. A literary agent had attended my talk and was interested in discussing the possibility of turning my story and the research I'd gathered into a book. As I read the email in the back of the taxi taking me to the airport, I felt a familiar sensation, that mixture of fear and excitement that had become my constant companion over the past 6 months. At the airport, waiting for my flight at gate B17, I called Diane. "You're not going to believe this," I began, and proceeded to tell her about the email. Her response was immediate and emphatic. "You have to do this, Patricia. This is what you were meant for." The airport bustled around, meet travelers rushing to gates, announcements echoing over the PA system, the scent of fast food and coffee permeating the air. I sat in a vinyl chair at the gate, phone pressed to my ear, watching planes take off and land through the massive windows, each one carrying people to new destinations, new experiences, new chapters of their lives. Just as I was being carried, not by a plane in this moment, but by a current of purpose and possibility I had never anticipated. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I had never written a book, never imagined myself as an author. Yet the idea of reaching more women with my message, of contributing to a necessary conversation about aging and visibility, pulled at me with undeniable force. Before boarding my flight, I replied to the literary agent's email, agreeing to a meeting the following week to discuss possibilities. 9 months after my daughter told me I was too old to attend my granddaughter's birthday party, I signed a book contract worth $47,500. The publisher, a mid-sized house known for its commitment to diverse voices, projected a release date in spring of the following year. As I sat in my attorney's office, signing my name on the dotted line at 3:42 p.m., I thought about the strange alchemy that had transformed pain into purpose, rejection into direction. I was not the same woman who had driven home in tears that day. I was stronger, more certain, more visible to others, and to myself. The attorney's office was elegant, yet understated leather chairs, wood paneling, tasteful artwork on the walls. The contract before me consisted of 27 pages of legal language that my attorney had carefully reviewed and explained. The advance would be paid in 3 installments, 1/3 on signing, 1/3 on acceptance of the completed manuscript, 1/3 on publication. The numbers felt almost unreal to me, not because they were particularly large by publishing standards, but because they represented tangible validation of the value of my voice, my experience, my perspective. As I signed my name for the final time and dated the documents September 17, 2023, I felt the sense of completion that extended beyond the business transaction. I was signing my name to a new identity, Patricia Holloway, author. The transformation that had begun with words of rejection was now formalized with words of acceptance, bound in legal language, and witnessed by professionals who saw nothing unusual about a 62-year-old woman having something valuable to say, something worth publishing, something people would pay to read. The book writing process consumed the next 7 months of my life. I wrote daily from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., taking breaks only for lunch and to stretch my increasingly stiff shoulders. I interviewed 47 women between the ages of 50 and 92, recording their stories of invisibility and resistance. I consulted with sociologists, psychologists, and media experts who studied ageism. I read 28 books and 113 academic articles on the subject. The manuscript grew to 87,342 words, each one carefully chosen to honor the experiences I was documenting. My daily routine became almost monastic in its regularity. I woke at 6:30 a.m., made coffee, spent 30 minutes in the garden or taking a walk around the neighborhood depending on the weather, then showered and settled at my desk by 8 a.m. sharp. The mornings were for writing new content, putting words on the page, following the outline I had developed with my editor over a series of phone calls and emails. Afternoons were for research, interviews, fact-checking, and revisions. Evenings were for letting my mind rest, for connecting with friends and family, for living the life that gave me something to write about. The discipline surprised me. I had never considered myself particularly structured or methodical before. Yet there was comfort in the routine, in the daily accumulation of words, in watching the manuscript grow, paragraph by paragraph, page by page, chapter by chapter. On days when the words came easily, I felt euphoric. On days when they had to be extracted painfully, one by one, I reminded myself of the women I had interviewed, of their courage in sharing their stories, of the importance of getting this right for all of us. Throughout this period, my relationship with Jennifer continued its gradual healing. We had dinner together every Sunday at 6 p.m., sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mark and Sophia. We talked about everything and nothing: her work, my book, Sophia's school projects, movies we'd seen, books we'd read. Occasionally, we revisited that painful day, examining it from new angles as our understanding evolved. I think I was afraid, Jennifer admitted during one such conversation, 11 months after it had happened. Seeing you age means I'm aging too. And seeing how society treats older women terrifies me. Her honesty was a gift I hadn't expected but gratefully received. We sat at her dining room table. The remains of dinner, a roast chicken with vegetables she had prepared, pushed aside to make room for coffee, cups, and the plate of cookies we were sharing. Outside, darkness had fallen, the windows reflecting our images back at us, mother and daughter, separated by 27 years but connected by blood, by history, by shared experience. Jennifer's face in the dim light looked strikingly like mine had at her age, the same high cheekbones, the same slight asymmetry to the smile, the same way of tucking hair behind one ear when thinking deeply. I wondered if she saw it too, this physical echo of me in herself, and if it was part of what frightened her. I understand that fear, I told her, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. But what I've learned is that the answer isn't to disappear. It's to change the way aging is seen and experienced. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Your book is going to help with that, she said. I'm glad you're writing it. The words weren't quite an apology for what had happened, but they were an acknowledgement of growth, of change, of movement toward a better understanding. And for now, that was enough. 14 months after the incident that had started it all, I stood in a bookstore, staring at a display of books with my name on the cover. Too Old for This, Reclaiming Visibility in a Youth-Obsessed World, sat in stacks of 7. The red cover my choice, bright against the black shelving. My first book signing was scheduled to begin in 17 minutes, and already a line was forming, women of all ages, but predominantly those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. As I watched them from my position near the back of the store, I saw not invisibility but radiance, not diminishment but power. These women had refused to disappear, just as I had. The bookstore was one I had frequented for years, a local independent shop that had somehow survived the rise of online retailers and chain stores. The air smelled of paper and coffee from the small cafe in the corner. Soft jazz played over the sound system, providing a soundtrack to the murmur of conversations as people browsed shelves or waited in line. A table had been set up near the front of the store, with copies of my book arranged in a careful display, a poster featuring the cover, and a photo of me taken by my photography instructor, at my requests, stood on an easel beside the table. The photo showed me in the red pants that had become something of a signature, looking directly at the camera with a steady gaze, neither smiling nor serious but simply present. Seeing it large and public was still strange to me, but no longer frightening. This was what visibility looked like, not hiding, not apologizing, simply being seen as I was. The event began at exactly 7 p.m. I read a passage from the book, answered questions for 38 minutes, and then began signing copies. Each woman who approached the table had a story to share, a moment of recognition to offer, a thank you to express. I signed 142 books that night, my hand cramping by the end, but my heart fuller than it had been in years. The last person in line was Jennifer, who had slipped in at the back without my noticing. She placed a copy of the book on the table in front of me. To my daughter, I wrote inside the cover, who taught me that it's never too late to redefine yourself. With endless love, Mom. The bookstore had mostly emptied by then. Just a few browsers remaining among the shelves, the staff beginning the process of closing for the night. Jennifer watched as I signed, her expression a mixture of pride and something more complex, perhaps recognition of her unintended role in bringing this moment into being. I never expected to be a cautionary tale in a published book, she said, but her tone was light, without accusation. You're not a cautionary tale, I corrected her. You're part of a much bigger story about how we all internalize these messages, how we all perpetuate them without meaning to, including me. She nodded, accepting this framing, perhaps even grateful for it. The book is really good, Mom, she said. I stayed up until 2 a.m., finishing it last night, coming from Jennifer, who measured praise carefully and was quick to offer criticism where she felt it was due. This was high compliment indeed. As we left the bookstore together at 9:47 p.m., walking to our cars parked side by side in the lot, Jennifer linked her arm through mine. You know what I was thinking during your reading? She asked. I shook my head. I was thinking how lucky Sophia is to have you as her grandmother. How lucky I am to have you as my mother. The words washed over me like warm water, healing places I hadn't realized were still raw. We're both lucky, I said, squeezing her arm gently. We get to learn from each other. The night was cool but not cold, the sky clear and filled with stars. Streetlights illuminated the parking lot with pools of yellow light, creating shadows that stretched and receded as we walked. In the distance, traffic moved along the main road, headlights cutting through darkness, each representing someone on their way home. To work, to a meeting, to a date, lives in motion, each with its own purpose and direction. Jennifer and I moved in companionable silence, our footsteps in sync on the asphalt. At our cars, we paused to embrace, holding each other a moment longer than usual. I'm proud of you, she whispered against my hair. So proud. As I drove home, those words echoed in my mind, a balm to the wound her other words had inflicted so many months ago. The circle felt complete somehow, though I knew our journey together would continue with all its complications and imperfections. But something fundamental had shifted, a rebalancing of power, a mutual recognition of worth that could not be undone. 18 months after being told I was too old, I celebrated my 64th birthday. The party, hosted at my home, brought together 27 people who represented the various chapters of my life, old friends and new, family members, colleagues from my newly established speaking career, women from my support group that had now grown to 34 members. Sophia, now 10, had insisted on baking my cake herself, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with candied violets she'd made following a YouTube tutorial. As I blew out the candles at exactly 8:15 p.m., I made a wish not for myself but for all of us, that we might live in a world where age brought not invisibility but honor, not diminishment but expansion. My home, once a place of solitary reflection, was transformed by the presence of so many people, voices filling every room, laughter echoing off walls, the mingled scents of perfumes and colognes, and the food we had shared. Gifts were piled on the coffee table in the living room, books, bottles of wine, handmade items, cards filled with heartfelt messages. But the real gift was this, the community that had formed around me, the connections that had grown from what had initially felt like isolation and rejection. I moved through my home, touching shoulders, accepting hugs, engaging in conversations that flowed naturally from deep to lighthearted and back again. At one point, I found myself in the kitchen with Diane, the two of us taking a moment away from the crowd. Look at all this, she said, gesturing toward the living room where voices rose and fell in animated conversation. This is what visibility looks like. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. This wasn't about being seen for how I looked, or what I represented to others. It was about being truly seen for who I was, in all my complexity, and connected to others through genuine recognition and respect. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Diane pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, pressing a small box into my hands. Inside was a silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of a door key. It's symbolic, she explained. For all the doors you've opened for yourself and for the rest of us. I put it on immediately, feeling the weight of it against my sternum, a tangible reminder of how far I had come. The metal was cool against my skin. The design simple but elegant, much like the truth I had discovered, that our worth does not diminish with age but is refined, distilled to its essential nature. Diane helped me with the clasp, her fingers deft, despite the slight tremor that had developed in recent years. We stood close together, friends who had supported each other through a journey neither of us had anticipated but both had embraced. When she stepped back to see how the necklace looked, her smile was confirmation enough. Perfect, she said, just like the woman wearing it. The compliment brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not because I believed myself perfect, but because I had finally learned to accept appreciation without deflection, to stand in the light of others' regard without shrinking or apologizing. It was, perhaps, the most profound change of all. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat in my garden under the stars. The temperature was a perfect 68 degrees, the air scented with jasmine from the vine I'd planted 3 years earlier. I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I had become, about the pain that had nearly broken me and the strength I had found in its aftermath, about the community that had formed around a shared experience of invisibility, now transformed into a movement for visibility, about my daughter, who was learning to see Marilee see me perhaps for the first time since she'd become an adult herself, about my granddaughter, who would grow up knowing that aging was not something to fear but something to embrace. The garden was peaceful at night, illuminated only by the porch light spilling from the kitchen window and the glow of the moon overhead. The tomato plants I had put in the ground so many months ago had yielded their fruit and were now beginning to wither with the change of seasons. Soon I would clear them away, prepare the soil for winter, plant cover crops to enrich the earth for next spring's growing. The cycle would continue, as it always had, each season with its purpose, its beauty, its essential role in the greater pattern. My life too was following its natural progression, not a decline but a continuation, an evolution into new forms of growth and contribution. As I sat there in the gentle darkness, I felt a profound sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, not because the battle was won, it wasn't. Ageism still permeated society, still shaped lives and limited possibilities, but something had shifted, at least in my corner of the world. A conversation had begun, awareness had been raised, connections had been formed, and I had discovered a truth that would sustain me through whatever came next. I was not too old for anything I chose to do. I never had been. I never would be. The realization settled over me like a warm blanket, comfortable and secure. I stayed in the garden until the night air grew cool enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, until the moon had moved noticeably across the sky, until my thoughts had come full circle from reflection on the past to anticipation of the future. When I finally rose to go inside, my joints were stiff from sitting so long in one position, a small reminder of the physical reality of aging, that I no longer tried to deny or disguise. It was simply part of me, neither defining me entirely nor irrelevant to my experience. I stretched, feeling the pleasant pull of muscles, the realignment of vertebrae, the release of tension. Then I walked back into my home, moving through darkened rooms with the confidence of long familiarity, making my way to bed where I would rest before tomorrow's new beginning. The next morning, I woke at 6:30 a.m. with a new idea forming. A foundation, perhaps, to help women over 50 retrain for careers after facing age discrimination, or a media campaign featuring older women in all their complexity and beauty, or a mentorship program pairing women across generations to share knowledge and break down stereotypes. The possibilities seemed endless, limited only by imagination and energy, both of which I had in abundance. As I made my coffee strong and black, the way I'd always preferred it, I opened my laptop and began to type, the words flowing easily now, practiced and precise. Phase 2, I titled the document, because this wasn't an ending. It was barely even a middle. At 64, I was just getting started. The morning light grew stronger as I worked, illuminating my kitchen, my home, my life with clarity and promise. Outside, birds sang their dawn chorus, insects hummed in the garden. The world woke to another day of possibility. And I was here, fully present, fully visible, ready to continue the journey that had begun with words meant to diminish but had instead become a catalyst for growth beyond anything I could have imagined. Too old, no such thing. Just alive, aware, and awake to all that was yet to come.